There's a philosophical question that's haunted me for years, one that rarely gets asked directly. What if our deepest moral disagreements aren't actually about values, but about what we're literally capable of seeing? My name is Lumen Quotient, and today we're exploring uncharted territory between what philosophers have traditionally kept separate. How our perceptual frameworks, the filters through which we process reality, don't just influence our ethical decisions, they predetermine which moral questions we can even ask. Philosophy videos typically approach ethics as a matter of reasoning. What should we value? How should we behave? What is good? But there's a more fundamental layer beneath all of this. Before we deliberate on these questions, our perceptual systems have already filtered reality for us in ways that make certain moral considerations visible, and others completely invisible. This isn't just another video about moral relativism or cognitive biases. We're diving into something far more profound: how the very architecture of perception creates entirely different moral universes. Let's start with a fundamental insight from cognitive science. Perception isn't passive reception, it's active construction. Your brain doesn't simply record what's out there. It actively constructs your experience of reality from incomplete information, filling gaps and making predictions based on past experience and evolutionary shortcuts. These aren't just interesting quirks. They reveal something profound. What you perceive as objective reality is actually a model constructed by your brain, a model that prioritizes certain aspects of reality while completely filtering out others. Consider attention. Right now, there are countless sensory inputs your brain is filtering out: the feeling of your clothes against your skin, background noises, peripheral visual information, all ignored because your attention system deemed them irrelevant. But here's where it gets philosophical. Your attention isn't just filtering sensory data, it's filtering moral relevance. For most of human history, the suffering of animals in food production remained perceptually invisible to most people. Not because they couldn't technically see it, but because their perceptual systems weren't configured to register it as morally relevant. What one culture perceives as an inert resource to be used, another perceives as a living entity with moral standing. These aren't just different interpretations of the same perceptual data. They're fundamentally different perceptual systems constructing different moral realities. Consider the Amazonian Runa people studied by anthropologist Eduardo Kohn. Their perceptual framework includes the ability to recognize personhood in non-human beings, not metaphorically, but literally perceiving consciousness where Western perception sees only objects. This isn't about beliefs, it's about how their perceptual systems have developed to register forms of communication and intentionality that Western perception filters out completely. Or consider how collectivist versus individualistic cultures perceptually organize social reality. Research shows that people from East Asian cultures literally track different visual information in social scenes than Westerners, attending more to relationships and contextual factors, while Westerners focus more on individual objects and categories. These aren't minor differences. They create entire moral universes with different fundamental questions. Where Western ethics asks, what rights does this autonomous individual have? Swing other perceptual frameworks might not even perceive autonomous individuals as the primary moral unit. The most profound moral disagreements between cultures often aren't about values, they're about which aspects of reality are perceptually available as morally relevant. Throughout history, humans have created technologies that extend our perceptual capacities, revealing previously invisible layers of reality and creating new moral frontiers. The microscope didn't just help us see smaller things. It revealed an entire microbial world that transformed our understanding of disease from moral punishment to biological process. Today, data visualization technologies allow us to see patterns, like climate change, that unfold too slowly or at too large a scale for our unaided perceptual systems to register. This technological extension of perception has created entirely new ethical territories. Artificial intelligence is now developing perceptual capacities that detect patterns humans cannot perceive at all, potentially revealing moral considerations that have remained invisible to human perception. But here's the philosophical question: if you can't perceive something directly, can it be morally relevant to you? If AI can perceive patterns of suffering or flourishing that human perception filters out, Does that create moral obligations we can't even comprehend? We've discussed cultural and technological differences in perception, but there's another crucial dimension: neurological diversity. The autism spectrum, synesthesia, aphantasia, prosopagnosia, these aren't just interesting variations. They represent fundamentally different ways of constructing perceptual reality. Many autistic individuals report perceiving details that neurotypical perception filters out, while sometimes missing social cues that neurotypical perception automatically constructs. This isn't a deficit, it's a different perceptual organization of reality. This raises profound philosophical questions. If different neurological systems construct reality differently, whose perception is correct? Is there a single true moral reality underneath these different perceptual models? Remember the Milgram and Stanford experiments we discussed in my previous video about what turns good people into monsters? Those experiments don't just reveal obedience to authority, they show how easily our perceptual systems can be reconfigured to filter out moral relevance. The guards in the Stanford prison experiment weren't just following roles. Their perceptual systems were literally filtering out the humanity of the prisoners, making certain moral considerations perceptually unavailable. If perception shapes ethics at this fundamental level, then developing our perceptual capacities becomes a moral project itself. Contemplative traditions across cultures have recognized this for millennia. Practices like mindfulness meditation aren't just about relaxation. They're systematic training regimens for expanding perceptual capacities to register morally relevant aspects of reality that our default perception filters out. Research shows that empathy training literally changes what elements of a scene a person perceives as salient. After training, subjects attend to different features, particularly signs of suffering that were previously filtered out of awareness. This suggests something radical. Moral development isn't just about reasoning better with the perceptual inputs we have. It's about developing perceptual capacities that make new moral considerations visible in the first place. The question then becomes, what don't you see yet? What morally relevant aspects of reality is your perceptual system currently filtering out, and how might you develop the capacity to perceive them? We began by asking whether our deepest moral disagreements might stem not from different values, but from different perceptual systems. This perspective transforms how we might approach moral progress, both individually and collectively. Rather than assuming we all perceive the same reality but simply value things differently, we might ask, how can we develop perceptual capacities that reveal currently invisible moral considerations? The most significant moral advances in history weren't just about extending existing values to new groups. They involved fundamental shifts in what humans could perceptually register as morally relevant at all. The abolition of slavery, animal welfare movements, environmental ethics, these required developing the perceptual capacity to register suffering and personhood where they were previously invisible. This leaves us with a profound challenge. The ethical frontiers of the future may not lie in resolving disagreements about our existing moral perceptions, but in developing entirely new perceptual capacities. The greatest moral failings of our time may not be violations of our current ethical principles, but our perceptual blindness to moral considerations we cannot yet see. The most important question isn't whether you're following your moral principles, it's whether your perceptual system is revealing or concealing the moral landscape. Thank you for exploring this uncharted territory with me. If you found this perspective valuable, please subscribe to Lumen Quotient for more philosophical explorations. And remember, the development of perception is itself an ethical project.